just your thoughts on the analysis that took part in the forum just earlier, just a moment ago, on the assessment of the Western economic model and zero negative interest rates maybe not having quite the effect that people had hoped they would, and what we do now that we have that realization and how we move forward.
I think there was confusion on what the Western economic model meant. Does it mean free markets and small government, rule of law, which historically was the model that enabled the Western world to become rich? But now the Western world has the big welfare states, the challenging demographics. That's certainly not something anybody would want to copy. So if you're talking about the old Western model, that's a good model. If you're talking about what the Western model has morphed into, that's something very worrisome. In effect, we're all on the road to becoming Greece. In terms of the interest rate policy, I'm concerned that simply pushing more liquidity out into the system by central banks is encouraging more debt. It's not solving the underlying structural problems, which I think are actually holding back economies. There's too much regulation, excessively high tax rates, too much double taxation on capital, cronyism, where government is doing favors for some industries and distorting markets. Those are the things that I think policymakers should be trying to fix. And I think artificially holding interest rates down, I mean, heck, that was one of the big reasons why we had the financial crisis last decade. So why do we think it's a good policy this decade?
Okay, and on the topic, some here in Europe consider austerity, and I'll define it by lowering public spending, but at the same time increasing tax rates to attempt to get us out of the situation that we seem to find ourselves in. We've come out of the immediate crisis of the last decade, but we have stagnant growth now. Is that something that you would advocate for, a policy of austerity going forward to really get us out of the doldrums?
Austerity means different things to different people. When the IMF goes around to different countries around the world, they tell them to raise taxes. Well, that's a form of austerity, but it's a form of austerity where you're telling the private sector to tighten its belt instead of the public sector, where you tend to have a lot of the waste and inefficiency. If countries do the right kind of austerity, if they in effect put limits on the growth of government spending, then you get very good results. But unfortunately, the IMF has led the world down a path of tax austerity, which means the private sector really never gets a chance to get up off the ground. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing very stagnant growth. It's not surprising that there's still high levels of unemployment. Companies don't create jobs, investors don't invest money when the tax burden is so stifling that it just makes it unprofitable. So it's very critically important to define austerity correctly. It should mean limits on the growth of the public sector, not further tax burdens on the productive sector of the economy.